High school has always been tough, but for young women today, a slew of new pressures mean it can even be more intense than it ever was before. Social media, an entirely different world, together with the mixed messages of what a girl should be like, all deliver an incredibly stressful environment to navigate. With us to explore all that, Jill Zemenovitz, CEO of the Girl Guides of Canada, Carla Chernick, a guidance counselor with the Toronto District School Board, Rahat Pai, a social worker who works with adolescents, and Nazra Noshad, community lead at the Knowledge Society, a member of the board of directors at We Charity, and a teen herself. Welcome to you all. I had the privilege of meeting three of you, and Nazra, it's your first time here, so welcome.
Thank you.
You've all seen the documentary 17 and Life Doesn't Wait. Why are girls under so much pressure at this particular point in their lives? Rahat, I'll start with you.
Well, I think there's lots of reasons that are explicit and some that are implicit, but generally I think, in this age that we're at where girls have more opportunities, not as many as we'd like, but more opportunities, there's tons of pressure for them really to succeed in those possibilities, and I think that therefore they put a lot of pressure on themselves. There's this pressure for girls to be perfect, that they need to be striving in all of the places in their lives, and reaching for this idealized view of themselves.
Is the pressure coming from themselves or from all of us?
I think both. I mean, I see most of the kids, the young women I see in my practice are stressed out because they're not getting 90s, because they're not the MVP on the team, because they are not succeeding in all their social relationships. And I see less with boys that sort of pressure. Boys are more comfortable with the wiggle room. A boy is not going to be concerned about getting a high grade in every single class, but more so a high grade in the classes that they worry or care about, and have more flexibility and room to wiggle in other areas. And so I think that pressure puts a lot on young women.
Carla, I hope I got your name right at the beginning, because you said your husband was watching. But just picking up on what Rahat said, where do you think this pressure is coming from?
I think definitely there are a lot of societal pressures that girls are facing. The world has changed, and as Rahat said, there are many more opportunities for girls now than there were even a decade ago, and girls are wanting to take advantage of that. And girls these days, what I've seen in the high schools is that they are chomping at the bit for opportunity. They're excited to move forward to the future, and this is an age where the whole world is ahead of them. They've got lots of tough decisions to make, and it's hard to navigate because there's lots of information out there to steer them in different directions.
And Jill, what do you think?
I would echo that. I think that they feel pressure from a variety of places, but also that everyone feels that. So we are all in a place where things are perhaps a little bit more unknown than they have been before, and that we're all trying to figure that out. And for girls in particular, what girls have told us is that some of the messages that they're getting is not just that there's pressure, but that it's not necessarily clear as to what they should become. So there's some mixed messages out there that's sort of pretty but not too pretty, smart but not in areas of STEM or only in certain areas. And so it is hard to navigate, and that ends up creating stress and anxiety.
Nazra, you've been listening to all the answers as a young woman, as a young girl. What do you think?
Well, along with all the opportunities that you guys have mentioned, there's also a huge amount of comparison that's available to us than there ever was before.
What do you mean by that?
Especially with social media,
right.
With Instagram, with Facebook, with Snapchat. You're able to see what are all the things that you would love to aspire to be or to do, and then who are the people that are the best at that, or who showcase that in the best way. And so not only are there more opportunities, but there is also room for a lot more comparison. And I think that in itself allows for a lot of pressure to occur.
When this comparison happens, is it happening amongst you? Are you comparing yourself to someone your age, or are you comparing yourself to someone who might be older?
I think it's both. It's a comparison of who am I today versus who I could be today, and who am I today versus who I aspire to be in the future and how I can get there.
I was just gonna say, our research absolutely confirms that. Every statistic that we got that was about any kind of stress, where we looked at girls who identified as heavy social media users, it went up. And it actually went up fairly significantly. So like a 20% boost that you would see in terms of girls identifying anxiety, identifying mixed messages, and then you looked at the core that was saying, I'm a heavy user, that automatically went up.
Well, how is it different for boys? Because boys are also on social media.
So boys are not our specialty, and we haven't done a lot of research into boys, but absolutely that is a general trend with social media. It's just that the girls that we talk to in terms of their actual experience and their feeling of not being necessarily able to measure up, that was really amplified with social media use.
Yeah, and I think about when we think about women and our traits, our innate traits about connecting and relationship, and I mean, I think men have those traits as well, but that's a truth of many women. I think social media is a new place to do that.
When you say traits, what are you talking about
So I
specifically?
mean, like, you know, what we consider more female or feminine traits, right? Being caregivers, being communicators, being connectors, being relationally bound or relationally driven. I think that social media, Instagram, Snapchat, all of those places are ways that young women are now using to connect with each other, where we used to talk on the phone for hours or hang out at the park for a really long time, do things that were more in real time or in real life. And I think that that has influences on young women. I think boys are still playing a little bit more in the park. They're playing basketball, they're doing different things in different ways, where the social media feels like an immediate way to connect. Do you agree?
I would, but I think also your question is really important. I think it's extremely important for us to just know what pressure boys feel as well. I don't think it is just a female problem.
Because you're not operating in a bubble. These are people that you interact with too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's more of just youth in general right now at this age are feeling a lot more pressure and stress. A lot of it has to do with the education systems that we're in, that we strive for grades, and the grades are the things that mark us as, being the smartest, or the number of clubs that you're in, if you're a president of a club, the universities you go to. And so all of those things add up to the pressure that people feel, both male and female. So I think it's an important note to make. And I agree with the whole like real time interaction component and piece. When we are able to connect with each other and talk, there is a whole different sort of emotion that can be expressed, and for you to pick up on the emotions that I'm expressing and for me to understand you much better, and then for us to be able to communicate in a way that allows for this understanding of within a conversation. And yes, I totally agree and feel and have experienced what you were talking about.
I don't want to give away too much in the film, but we've all seen it. And in the film, we see Audrey, and she's facing some incredible academic pressure. She had like a 95, and it was still doubt if she would get into her university, her school of choice. Carla, why has getting into university become so difficult?
I think there's just so much competition. And on the topic of social media can be fantastic. It can also be detrimental. It is relentless. It's 24/7. So when kids are thinking about top marks, or as Audrey mentioned, being a part of DECA, being a part of different extracurriculars, it's constantly in their face. It's midnight, it's 2 a.m., it's 3 a.m., talking about other teams, other schools that they're competing against, robotics, all those sorts of things. It adds to the pressure for kids. Universities are looking for the best of the best, and they can, as they should. But it makes it challenging for kids because they want to be the best of the best. There's no time to take a break. There's no time.
It seems like this creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. Rahad, how are girls dealing with all of this stress?
Well, I think that we see that they are more anxious. I think there's, like Amy said, it's constant. There's no time for the nervous system to relax and just be. There's no time to have space that's open where you can be trying out different things, trying out who you want to be friends with, trying out what sports you might like. You know, it's interesting when you say the president of the club. I feel like many of the young people I see want to be the president, the leader, like I said before, the best of. Just participating is never enough anymore.
How much of this has to do with status? Because you're saying the president of. Is this about wanting to be at like the top, or?
I think it is a little bit about how girls are recognized, right? Like I think that it's harder. I mean, I see a lot in my practice, the quiet, introverted young woman, and young man as well, to your point, but the young person who isn't seen, they don't fit the ideal, they don't fit how the world is built for this extroverted, sort of more overt success. So those subtleties, so we know now about introverts, about how thoughtful they can be, about how much they can bring to the table. Those qualities aren't as recognized or as valued. And so I think that then there is the pressure. I think there's one scene in the movie where there's a basketball game and Kiki comments on, I wasn't enough. And it's interesting because she was, clearly a key player. I'm sure every time she's on the court, she's a key player. But it's always about, I've let somebody down, or I'm not enough, or I'm not seen, I'm not recognized. I think that's a real reality for young people today.
Yeah, when it was the basketball game and Kiki, it was surprising because she was so crestfallen, and you just wanted to give her a hug and say it's okay. Nazra, you have a really unique story. You're the same age as the girls in the documentary. Did you face the same academic pressures?
A bit, yes. I think most of my pressure, though, came in my senior year. My parents, really wanted me to go to awesome universities, but I actually took a gap year last year, and a lot of the pressure I've felt has been over the past year, and my parents culturally just not understanding what is the gap year, like why wouldn't you go to university, why wouldn't you pursue post-secondary education, and so throughout high school, like familial pressure of towards academics, towards just even extracurriculars, I think everyone feels to an extent.
And do you feel torn in doing what your parents want you to do because you want to respect them and their wishes, as opposed to what you need or want to do yourself?
No. And that, I think, is something that took a lot of confidence and resilience, and something that I built up over high school to get to the point of. When I knew that I wanted to take a gap year, I was very confident in that, and my parents did not want me to do that at all, and I did it anyways. But I think I'm a really unique case in that. I think most people, most girls, most guys, just confidence is not, and other values as well in our education system are not really talked about or taught or encouraged. They're not of a conversation topic. And so building confidence, building resilience, building grit, building ambition, I think are hard things to do. And it was only because I was part of TKS, the Knowledge Society, and surrounded by other
Is that what you
young
did in your
people.
gap year?
Yes, yeah. So I was a student part of TKS, the Knowledge Society, which is like this Olympic level training ground for young people that want to solve the world's hardest problem. It's literally, as we talk about, ambition and young people that want to strive to do a lot more than they are right now. It's kind of like the epitome of that. But surrounded by, and I think this is really important, and the messages that I think all of us are trying to promote is being surrounded by communities and people, and hearing messages of encouragement, empowerment, of the traits and the values that we should build goes a long way in us being able to develop our own confidence, resilience, and grit.
And it goes beyond marks, right?
Yes.
What did that gap year give you that you didn't have before?
The opportunity to understand the world and myself better in a way that I don't think I ever would have if I was still in school.
Did you go back to school?
No, I did not.
Are we seeing more young people say, this is too much, I prefer to rewrite the narrative, the way Nazra has, Rahad?
I think they're trying. I think what Nazra says that's really interesting is this idea of just being with our young people and letting them explore and figure out who they are, and really validating that possibility rather than the prescriptive idea of this is the way it's supposed to be. And it's not to say that many young people won't choose that route, but along that way, how do we help them figure out and really validate who they are? And you see that in the one scene that you showed earlier with Audrey and her parents. She's really trying to push out and say, like, look at who I am, look at what I want to think about. And in that moment, they're like, I don't know, I'm not so sure. There's other moments throughout the film where other parents do it a bit differently. And you see their young people show up in different ways. And
Carla, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think the education system has a lot of gaps. I think we're very much in a box, and as though we think perhaps we're educating kids outside of the box, there's a whole lot more work that can be done. I think promoting opportunities like gap years, promoting different college programs, different experiential learning opportunities for kids. We look at Mitch in the documentary going to an alternative school. That was the solution for her. If that alternative school didn't exist, who knows where she'd be right now. And I think of students that I see on a regular basis at school who just don't fit the mold of a traditional school. And the more opportunities we can give them to figure out who they are and to experience life outside of the classroom, the better we're doing at preparing them to handle what's coming in the future.
And parents too, they really are trying to do the best for their child with the tools that they have. Jill, how do you see girls rewriting this narrative? And how can parents help them do that?
I think parents, also coaches, also teachers, basically everyone who has a girl in their lives can really take the time to listen to them, to what they're saying. And the part in the film where Audrey was speaking to her parents was also very visceral for me, both as being a part of Girl Guides of Canada, but also as a mother, in terms of just listening and giving a platform for girls like Nazra to really say how they're feeling and how they want to define their future. I think parents and adults fall into the same traps of defining these unachievable societal norms that then girls are very stressed about trying to achieve.
What was your parents' reaction when you decided to drop out?
They were not happy with it. It was a really, really hard, difficult conversation. And at the end of it, the decision was, you're not doing this.
But you did it?
Yes.
So how did you get to a point where they accepted your decision?
It was 2 weeks after. I think it's not so much the decision itself. I think just parents worry about, are their kids mature enough to be able to make the decisions that they're making? Will they be okay in the real world? Will they be happy? And so I do think most parents have the best interest for their kids in mind. So it wasn't about whether or not I took the gap year. I think deeper than that, it was, will Nazra be okay? And after seeing that, taking the gap year, and I'm doing well, and I'm doing actually really awesome, and I'm happy, and I'm working, they were fine.
And you're not just in the basement watching Netflix, right?
Yes.
Carla, in the movie, in the film, we see one of the girls, Kiki, trying to figure out the ramifications of a school shooting. Mm-hmm. How much of an issue is fear of violence for students today?
I think it's situational. I think students have fear from community safety. I think there are students who feel unsafe in school, and I think certainly in different pockets of the province, of the country, of the city, that is stronger. I think the importance of school community is huge. The stronger we can build a sense of school community, the safer the kids feel. And, you know, I think of my guidance office, I love when it's loud and busy and full of kids, because it means that the kids are feeling comfortable to come in and seek support, whether it be academic, whether it be scholarships, whether it be something with friends, something in the community. That's really what a school should be, is somewhere where kids do feel safe, where they want to be, where they want to spend time, and the halls should be busy after school. So I think the more we can focus on things like the extracurriculars, getting kids involved, and not just focusing on being the title person with DECA or the title person with robotics, but being a participant that is valued. And you know, that's what we're looking for the kids.
And also, I think you have to, how do you establish trust with students who might be having certain pressures, but they might not feel comfortable talking about it?
Time and listening. That's what you do. And the more that you can listen, the more that you can spend time and show the students that you have time to spend on them, the more they will open up, and the more that they will see you as a trusting adult that they can go to.
And Jill.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to that, just from a student perspective, because I've actually had guidance counselors who I don't feel supported by heavily, is also the messaging.
What do you mean by that?
So sometimes a lot of the guidance counselors feel as if they're removed from the school, that you need to approach them to be able to solve a problem. And I think that's fine for a lot of students who are part of, you know, the ambitious bubble, who are going to actively seek out support. But there are a lot of students that I think fall under that, and majority of the students who don't even know if it's okay to be able to seek support or to talk to a guidance counselor, both for anything that's academic or anything to do with any issue. So I think the messaging also needs to be both, I think, said more and shared more, yeah.
And beyond school itself, what's happening at home also plays a role. In the film, there is one girl who's on her own and she's dealing with financial pressures. Jill, how much do younger people worry about financial pressures?
They do worry about it. They do talk about that being a source of anxiety, and I think part of that is the narrative that all adults talk about this unknown economic future and what is happening in this fourth industrial revolution. What will jobs look like? Will there be traditional jobs as we know them now, or is it going to be totally different? I mean, they're not apart from that conversation. They hear that, so that is a concern. We did some research on girls' employment over the summer, and we actually found that they were expressing that they didn't feel that they were paid the same as boys. So we decided to actually go out and test this, and we did actually find that there was a $3 wage gap between boys and girls.
We actually
in
have
some
that
employment.
graph. So the Girl Guides study that the challenges girls face in part in full-time work. First of all, what kinds of jobs are they getting? And we're looking at the graph right now. Before that, can you just explain what we're looking at right now?
Sure. So what this shows is full-time jobs and then other informal work. It was actually interesting in doing studies like this. We didn't want to ask about just jobs. So the way we talked about it was, how do you spend your summer? And then we got the girls to describe to us how they spent their summer, and then we categorized that.
And actually, before you go on, I just want to explain to people who are listening to our podcast. The graph is the gender wage gap starts early. We have girls and we have boys. And for full-time jobs, we see that boys are making $18.01 on average per hour, and girls, it's $15.26. And for full-time informal work with family, friends, or neighbors, boys are making $14.98 per hour, and girls, $8.67.
So that's a $6 wage gap, which is shocking in the sense that you would think that for the informal work, which means work for family or neighbors or perhaps your own parents, you would think that you would actually earn more. Like those should be the people that care most. In fact, we saw a wider wage gap than with informal.
Do we know why that is?
We don't, except, I mean, I will say that in my house, my daughter is 13, and then we have a 10-year-old son. And I would never have thought ever, if you had asked me before, are you perpetuating this? Of course. And she pointed out, after we talked about the research, that in fact, when she babysits at our house, she's not paid. So we talk about that being part of her contributing to the family and what we need. And, you know, she rightfully said, if I'm going out to babysit, you know, I earn a certain amount an hour, and when I'm here babysitting, I don't, which was absolutely true. So that was, you know, obviously not something we set out to do, but what kind of messages did that give her about her value and valuing her time? And what sort of messages was she then carrying on?
And it's also about how if you're treated fairly versus unfairly. And you also did another study, and we have another graph here, and the title is Treated Unfairly, Boys versus Girls. And for boys, they say 41% of boys sometimes get treated unfairly, but for girls, it's 61%. And for boys, 19% on a regular basis. For girls, it's 20%. And rarely for boys is 36%. And for girls, it's 16%.
Yeah, what the slide really shows is that for girls, basically a regular part of your everyday life is feeling at some point like you're treated unfairly.
What does that do to somebody?
Well, what we found is when we asked about when that started for them for the first time, we were surprised because it actually started really early. And so we really thought about, I think a lot of people think about gender inequality as when women are in the workforce and once they're, you know, going for a partnership or the C-suite or things like that. But we found that girls first experienced gender inequality between the ages of 10 and 13. And we found the repercussions of that were that they were making some decisions that actually affected what would happen later in life. So they were choosing certain courses, they were choosing certain universities, and that was actually having the effect of closing some doors for them.
That is shocking, and I want to get your reactions from that. But I have a clip from the documentary, 17 and Life Doesn't Wait. And so we talked about Kiki. Kiki is an elite basketball player, and this is what she had to say about fairness.
Look at Gino, he the head coach, but every assistant on his bench, like every assistant coach is a female. Yeah. Like that don't make no sense. If you can have 4 or 5 assistant females. Why you can't have one head coach that's a female?
I think either men or female can be good. They can be good coaches. It doesn't matter, as long as they know what they're talking
I
about.
feel like on the collegiate level, in the pros and stuff, they should hire more women. Because it looks bad. I feel like it looks really bad when you have all these women who've been in the WNBA, they know what they're talking about, but you won't turn around and hire them. So I think that's bad.
Kiki is very aware of what's happening. And Rahat, what does this do to a young woman of her age to know
I think
all
it's so interesting in that movie, that moment, how she's so matter of fact about that. You know, that's just dumb. That's just bad. Why? Like, and it's a really good question, right? So I think the less role models we have, the less opportunities we think are actually attainable. You know, I think that in our minds, I mean, my daughter, we were talking about where she wants to focus her study in grade 11, turned to me, and it was during the Raptors playoff. She's like, I would really like to be an NBA coach. I think the boys in the room were like, yeah, as if. She's a great athlete. Why not aspire to that? But there's nobody out there for to say, yeah, like so-and-so. So I think it has an impact.
And Carla?
Well, I think I look at my school, and we have a robotics team at my school where they came second at World Championships last year. And who leads the robotics team but girls? I think the more that our girls can see leaders in the community, leaders in different businesses, on TV like yourself, the more they can kind of break through and see themselves in the future, imagine themselves in different positions and jobs, and work towards it. I think Kiki nailed it on the head. You know, there needs to be more female representation out there.
We talk about representation mattering, and just to pick up from what Carla was saying, are we seeing enough of it?
No, so when we did our study on role models, 25% of girls told us that they didn't see a role model in their dream job. And how does that affect how you shape your dreams if you don't see yourself in that in the future?
Yeah, I agree. I think what you are able to perceive and conceive of as a reality for yourself is what you are able to pursue. And I think it's just as simple as that.
How should we speak up about the wage gap when we're talking to young women?
I mean, I think we need to share the facts. I think the information, the data, the research, where the gaps are is really important for young people to know. I think they need to know what they are, what they have a right to, and how to ask for what they deserve, right? I think to help young women to have a voice, to be able to say, no, I deserve this, and to encourage them in different ways throughout their life, throughout their adolescence, to ask for and to speak up for about unfairness.
Because it sounds like we're telling young girls you can be anything you want to be, but not that, or you can aspire to be this, but not that. And then when you find that you're in that place, you're not being paid the same amount of money. And for it to start, as you said, so young, between 10 and 13, how damaging is all of this mixed messaging and stress to girls in the long run? Joe?
I can take that. I mean, I think, so we know there's a gender wage gap for women, and we know that's about 87 cents to the dollar. We have now done the research on girls at Girl Guides of Canada. We don't know that there is an exact causal result between the two of them. It's just that when we know what we know about women, and that has been studied extensively, and we now have this new data on girls, and we see that there's a real mirroring between not only the gender wage gap, but also the sectors that women choose to go into. We have to think that something is happening young for these decisions to end up where these stats end up for women. So we don't have an absolute clear causal relationship, but I think you can make assumptions by the fact that the data really supports the same data that we see for women.
I want to read a quote to you all from the Washington Post about a perfectionism study published in Psychology Bulletin. Over 3 decades, the researchers tracked 40,000 college students in the United States, Canada, and Britain. And the study revealed a bump in 2 types of perfectionism: self-oriented, in other words, having high expectations of yourself, and other-oriented, where people have rigorous standards for others and treat them with hostility or disdain when they fall short. But the most dramatic finding by far was a 33% spike in the kind of perfectionism where teens feel they must be perfect to win approval from others, whether it be friends, social media followers, or parents. These teens tend to believe others judge them harshly, and they see their schools and families as unreasonably demanding. Psychologists call this the most debilitating form of perfectionism because youth are plagued by the feeling they've let others down, whether it be by bottoming out on a test score, missing a shot on goal, or getting a no from a first choice college. Rahat, it seems there's so much there, but it seems more and more girls are dealing with the pressure to be perfect. How do we combat this?
A great educator said to a young person I know that it would be really great if she failed a test and was okay with that. Right? I think that we need to have more acceptance for young people trying different things out and making mistakes. Failing a test, not getting into the college of your dreams, you'll see, like, things can be okay. There's much more, there are many other possibilities, and there's lots of ways to get to where you want to go. I think we have this one prescriptive view, this one prescriptive idea of how young people can be successful. And there are millions of ways to be successful. So I think we need to start making that belief more robust and creating possibilities for young people to try out who they are in different ways.
Nazra, do you think that we need to talk more about failure the same way we talk about success?
Yeah, I do. And I think also more than just that, as we're talking about what are all these things that girls can do and just youth in general, I think the underlying thing is building confidence and building a love for yourself. If you love yourself and if you have confidence in yourself and you fail a test, for example, or you do something wrong or you make a mistake, you're able to pick yourself back up and you're like, I'm good. I know where I want to be. I know I'm working towards it, and everything will be okay if I can still pick myself up and keep going.
But do you think that's difficult to get to if you don't have the right support systems?
Yes, I do. I think the reason most people lack confidence is just because when they're younger, or both within their families, within their friends, within schools, confidence and values and characteristics and traits aren't things that are talked about. They're not things that are shared. They're not things that are showcased. And so it's something that you have to build and pick up yourself as you're going through life and as you're going through school. And I think that's why it translates to if you can't build that foundation when you're younger and your mind is developing, then when you're older, you can still have insecurities that stemmed from things that happened when you were a child or when you were a teenager, or lack of confidence that wasn't developed while you were younger. And so I do think it's all correlated, and it all the environments that we're in and the messages that surround us all shape who we are today and who we can become.
And Carla, how do we empower girls?
I think by continuing to role model and continuing to provide them with the supports, as you mentioned. I often say to students, imagine yourself as a spider in the middle of a spider web, and that web is your support network. Who's on the inside layer, and on the outside layers, who can you identify? What activities can you identify that give you those transferable skills that help you build the resilience, that help you deal with failure, that help you set your goals? I think the more that the students feel supported, the more that youth feel supported, the stronger they will become.
Thank you so much for all your time. We've run out of time. We have to go to the premiere of 17 on Live Can't Wait.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.